Just imagine spending months taking care of someone, changing bandages, feeding them, cleaning wounds, putting up with bad moods, shouting, enduring everything, even with a tired body, hungry, with overdue bills, with children at home waiting for the little you can bring. Now, imagine doing all of this with an open heart, with faith, with the hope that somehow God is watching, that your kindness will be recognized one day. Now, hold on to this. What if I told you that this old man, the one she took care of as if he were family, the one everyone in the hospital called a burden, a destitute, a useless person, was actually the African millionaire who owned everything, the most powerful man in that place, who hid, who stayed there on purpose, only watching those who really had a heart. This story is not just about suffering, it is about injustice. It is about public humiliation. It is about ridicule. It is about a woman who was called crazy, who lost her job, who left crying without knowing that her life was about to change in a way that no one, absolutely no one, in that hospital could have imagined. What will happen here is a breathtaking twist, with revelation, shock, poetic revenge, and one of those lessons that we take with us for life, because when everyone turns their backs, heaven acts in a way that shuts a lot of people up. So, take a deep breath, because what you are about to see now is a real, powerful African story. You watch with your heart in your hand and your eyes full of tears. This woman, she was the kind of person who life beat and stepped on, but she kept standing, not because she was strong by choice, but because she never had the option of falling. She carried on her shoulders a story of struggle that no one saw. Those who looked from the outside only saw a poorly dressed elderly caregiver with a tired look, walking quickly through the hospital corridors in the same worn-out shoes as always. No one imagined how much she had cried in secret, how many nights she had spent without sleeping, afraid of not having enough food for her children the next day. She had that look of someone who has heard many no's, of someone who has had doors closed in her face, of someone who has felt the bitter taste of abandonment. After her husband died, the bills piled up, her friends disappeared, and the promises of help were just empty words. She got by as best she could. She did laundry, cleaned. Neighbors' houses, took care of children, until a job as a caregiver at the hospital came up. It wasn't her dream job, but it was what paid for the rice, beans, and stale bread for breakfast. And that was how she began to take care of that sick old man, a patient that no one wanted. He was grumpy, complained about everything, and had a frightening appearance. Too thin, a big beard, dirty clothes, a strong smell of abandonment. They said he had no family, that he was there because no one wanted to know about him anymore. Many nurses asked to be transferred to another department just so they wouldn't have to deal with him. The younger caregivers cried with rage when the shift put their name next to his. But she stayed, even with a heavy heart, even when she returned home with her hands shaking from exhaustion. She stayed. And it wasn't for money. After all, what she earned was barely enough to buy medicine for her own children. She stayed because there was something inside her that wouldn't let her abandon those in need. She had this flaw, as she herself said, "My heart is too big," even when it shouldn't be. Every day she arrived early and made sure to clean his room with more care than she did her own house. She brought a damp cloth that smelled of cheap soap just to try to alleviate the musty smell that filled the room. She changed the sheets and did her best to bathe him, even when he complained, cursed, and threatened her with the little strength he had left. She listened in silence, and she always responded with the same patient tone, "I'm here to help you, whether you like it or not." One day she spent her last few coins to buy a nicer-smelling soap just to make him more comfortable. Another time, she brought a piece of homemade bread that she had gotten from a neighbor and offered it to him, even though she knew he might refuse. And of course, he refused, as he always did. But she didn't give up. She kept going, day after day, without complaining, without missing a beat. Even when she could barely stand up, deep down she felt an enormous sadness when she looked at that man lying on that bed. She knew what it was like to feel alone, invisible. She knew what it was like to beg for help in silence, hoping that someone at some point would reach out. That's why she insisted on taking care of him as if he were someone important, as if he were part of the family, as if he were someone who deserved to be loved, even without knowing his full name, even without knowing where he came from, even without knowing who he really was. But what she didn't know yet is that that old man wasn't just any old patient. He wasn't just another name forgotten in a medical file. The truth about him, well, that truth was about to explode in a way she could never have imagined. And what would come next would change her life forever. Hey, now tell me, did you also feel that tightness in your chest while listening to this story? Do you also have a heart that feels everything, that cries, that gets emotional, that vibrates when you see someone being rewarded after so much pain? This is exactly the space. It's where only those who truly feel it stay. Those who love strong African stories, with twists and turns and lessons that we take with us for life. So do the following. Leave a like so I know you're here with me, and press the subscribe button, because there are many stories like this coming. Stories that heal, that inspire, and that touch the depths of the soul. Are you coming along? She no longer knew what it was like to sleep a full night. Her body was always on automatic mode, waking up before the alarm clock went off, even when sleep had barely arrived. Those few minutes of rest were never enough, but the fear of losing her job, not having enough food for her children, or being late paying the rent was stronger than any exhaustion. Every morning, she would put her feet on the cold floor of that small, cramped room, and for a few seconds look at the ceiling, take a deep breath, and say that phrase that had already become a mantra for survival. God has a purpose. And so it went on. Her clothes were always the same. She could no longer hide the patches on her skirts and blouses. Her shoes had a hole that she tried to hide with a small piece of cardboard inside, just to endure another day of walking to the hospital. Anyone looking from the outside could only see a tired-looking woman with hurried steps, and might even think she was just another one in the crowd. But no one could imagine what she was carrying on her back. Only she knew what it was like to leave the house with her stomach growling with hunger after having left her children with a glass of water with sugar because she had nothing else to give them. At the hospital, the situation was no better. The other employees would comment behind her back, laugh at her worn-out clothes, and make cruel jokes, as if she was less important for not having money to dress better or carry a state-of-the-art cell phone. But she pretended not to hear, or rather, she heard, felt. It hurt deep down, but she chose not to react. She didn't have the energy to waste on that. All the strength she had was to endure the whole day, taking care of people who no one wanted to take care of. That's how she ended up with the most difficult patient in the hospital, an old man that everyone avoided. Bad-tempered, aggressive, the kind of guy who would yell at anything, even complain about the water. Many of the caregivers had already asked to be taken off his shift. They said it was a waste of time, that he was just there waiting for death to come. But she stayed, because behind all that thick skin, she saw a human being, someone who, just like her, must have been carrying a lot of pain, a man who perhaps had lost everything too. She cleaned his room with a care that she didn't even have in her own house. She calmly mopped the floor, adjusted the pillow, changed the sheets even when he said it wasn't necessary. She made a point of talking to him, asking how he was, even though she knew that most of the time the answer would come in the form of grumbling or silence. And do you know what's craziest? Even when he mistreated her, she kept the same calm tone of voice, with that tired but sincere smile. It was as if she knew that deep down he needed her more than he wanted to admit. One day she saw that he was shivering from the cold. It was a winter morning. One of those when the wind comes in through the cracks in the window like a razor on your skin. The hospital didn't have enough blankets. The other caregivers shrugged, saying there was nothing they could do. But she went to her worn-out backpack, took out her own old blanket, the one she used at home to cover her children, and put it on top of him. Without expecting thanks, without expecting recognition, she just put it on and said, softly, "God has a purpose, and you'll find out what it is." Another time, she arrived at the hospital early because she heard that he was agitated and had refused breakfast. She stopped at a bakery on the way with the few coins she had in her pocket and bought a simple loaf of bread. She entered his room with that air of someone who already knows that she's going to get kicked, but still insisted, "Look, it's not as warm as you like, but it's from the heart. Eat it, it's good for you." And, "Of course," he grumbled, turned his face to the side and acted like he always did. But after she left, he ate the bread, all of it, like he did every day, pretending that it had just been to satisfy his hunger, but deep down, he was already starting to look forward to her presence. What no one saw were the nights when she cried alone after an exhausting shift. She cried not only because she was tired, but because she was afraid of not being able to cope, of failing her children, of getting sick and not being able to work. Sometimes her body would shake with fever, and yet she would be there, standing, holding a towel with warm water to wipe the forehead of that stubborn old man who insisted that he didn't need anyone. She took care of him, like someone would take care of a loved one, even though he was a complete stranger. And it was at these times that she would talk to herself, as if she were talking to God. "I know that everything has a reason. I know that the Lord is watching. So just give me the strength to carry on." It was this faith that she clung to. In the midst of that hard routine, she still found space to believe that all of that would make sense one day. But what she didn't know was that that man had a secret, a big secret, one of those that turns someone's life upside down from one day to the next. And while she gave herself day after day, without knowing that she was taking care of someone who could change everything for her, life was there, waiting for the right moment to make the big change. And when that moment came, she would understand that every tear, every sleepless night, every piece of bread shared, everything had been just the beginning of a story that no one in that hospital would ever forget. The worst part of it all wasn't the tiredness, nor the hunger, nor the back pain from carrying so much weight all day. What hurt the most was the humiliation, because one thing is the struggle of life, the one we face in silence, knowing that we need to keep going. But another is having to swallow insult after insult, as if she were less, as if she had no value at all just because she earned little and wore simple clothes. The hospital supervisor then, she seemed to enjoy making her feel small. She was a bitter woman, the kind who loves to point the finger at others. Every day there was a new provocation. In the middle of the hallway, in front of patients, doctors, and other employees, she made a point of shouting, exposing, and belittling. "You're just a cleaning lady. You're only here because no one else wanted this job. You're always stuck with that old man who doesn't even know your name. What do you want? A medal?" Her loud voice echoed. Everyone's eyes turned, and her face burned with shame. It made her want to cry right there. But she took a deep breath, swallowed her tears, lowered her head, and carried on. And as if that weren't enough, the other caregivers, those who also earned little, but insisted on pretending they were superior, took every opportunity to rub more salt in the wound. They laughed at her during break times. They whispered mean jokes every time she walked by. They even made secret bets. "How long will it take until she gives up on the crazy old man?" one of them said the other day, laughing out loud, and another, without the slightest shame, added, "Why go through all this effort for that dirty old man? What does she think she's going to get out of it? At most, she'll get pneumonia." And with every joke, every mocking laugh, she closed herself off a little more. She went to her corner, cried in secret in the bathroom, quickly dried her eyes and returned to the old man's room as if nothing had happened. But inside her, her heart ached. It wasn't just sadness, it was a mixture of shame, anger, helplessness, and that thought that insisted on coming back. Why me? Why me? But do you know what was most incredible? Even with all of this, she didn't retaliate. She didn't fight back. She didn't respond in kind. Instead, she responded with work, with care, with even more attention to the old man that everyone despised. It was as if somehow she believed that God was seeing everything, and that one day all of this would make sense. Little did she know that while everyone was humiliating her, the man she cared for, even though he was silent, was paying attention to every detail, and what he would do when the right time came. No one in there would be able to forget. Not the supervisor, not the mocking colleagues, and much less her. With each passing day, the situation seemed to get worse. The humiliation from the supervisor and the laughter from the other caregivers were not enough. Now even some doctors and patients started making jokes behind her back. It was as if taking care of that sick old man was a reason to be ashamed. He was treated like a dead weight, a nuisance forgotten by everyone. The nickname they gave him in the hospital corridors was cruel. The homeless one, and they said it so naturally that it almost seemed like his official name. As they passed by his room, the comments were always the same. This old man is just taking up beds that could be saving real people. Leave it alone. Any day now he'll go by himself. One day, a nurse, thinking she wasn't listening, said mockingly, "This caregiver thinks she's Saint Mother Teresa, taking care of people who should already be in the cemetery." She heard it, and it hurt like a knife. But she took a deep breath, as she always did, pretended she didn't hear, and moved on. She could pretend not to care, but the truth is that each of those words weighed heavily on her chest. Sometimes, when she returned home, the silence of the night was broken only by her muffled sobs into the pillow. Not because she thought people were right, but because it was too tiring to be the target of so much injustice, and worse, was. Seeing the looks of contempt people gave the man she cared for, no one saw a human being there. They only saw a ragged old man with a disheveled beard, worn-out clothes, and a tired look. A man who, in everyone's eyes, had no value whatsoever. But she saw things differently. She saw a man in pain, with a story, with a life that had perhaps been very difficult or very lonely. She didn't know what he had been through, where he came from, or why he was there with no one to visit him. But she knew one thing. He deserved respect. He deserved care. He deserved someone who would at least look at him as a human being. That's why, even after hearing everything, she continued. She continued to adjust his pillows with affection. She continued to prepare his porridge with more attention, even when he said he didn't want to eat it. She continued to change the sheets carefully, to prevent him from getting sores on his body. She continued to say little prayers at the foot of the bed, before leaving, asking God to ease the pain of that man who everyone called a useless burden. And every time someone asked her why she still wasted time with him, she would only answer with that sad but faith-filled smile, "Because no one deserves to be treated like trash. No one." And the most curious thing is that as the days went by, she began to notice small signs in him, a more attentive look, a firmer handshake, a less aggressive mumble, as if, even without admitting it, he was beginning to feel that there was someone real by his side. But of course, no one else saw that. They continued to treat the two of them as the invisible ones in the hospital. Little did they know that, inside that old man, there was a secret kept under lock and key, a secret that when it came to light would make many people swallow every word of contempt. But that is a part of the story that is yet to happen. It was a Thursday afternoon, one of those days when the heat seemed to stick to your skin and the air inside the hospital felt even heavier. She had just changed his sheets, adjusted his pillow, and as she did every day, brought him a glass of cold water, because she knew he didn't like warm water. She already knew his every mood, his every look, his every grumble. She already knew when he was in pain, when he was irritated, and even when he just wanted someone there, even if he pretended not to. But that day, something was different. As she adjusted the blanket and checked to see if he was okay, the old man, who usually remained quiet or just made some harsh comment, looked straight into her eyes, a look she had never seen before. It wasn't anger, it wasn't impatience. It was a look curious, like someone observing someone closely for the first time. And then the question came that took her by surprise. Why do you help me so much, if I can't give you anything in return? She froze for a second. She hadn't expected that. She swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and on impulse answered in that simple, direct tone she always used. Because everyone deserves care. It doesn't matter if they can give something back or not. She tried to smile, but her heart raced. For the first time, he had said something that wasn't rude, and worse, he seemed to be truly paying attention to her. After that, in the following days, she began to notice things that she hadn't noticed before. Instead of keeping her eyes closed all the time as she used to, he would now watch her movements as she cleaned the room or organized the medicines on the shelf. There was a moment when she suddenly entered the room and caught him, writing something in an old, yellowed notebook, which he hid under his pillow as soon as he noticed she was nearby. She tried to pretend she hadn't seen it, but curiosity began to pound in her head. What was he writing down there? It wasn't a prescription, she was sure. It didn't look like a diary either, because he wrote quickly, almost as if it were a list or notes from someone noting something very important, and it didn't stop there. Every now and then he would ask her random questions, which would leave her even more confused. He would ask things like, "Do you have children? Do you live far from here? What would you do with a lot of money if you ever had it?" She always answered without understanding the reason for such sudden curiosity, but deep down, it messed with her. It was as if, somehow, he was testing her, and she began to suspect. She didn't know exactly what, but there was something about that old man that wouldn't close. He had a different way of looking at her, like someone carrying a secret too big to share with anyone. And even though he seemed like a man who was worn out by life, that look, that way of observing everything, revealed that there was much more there than she imagined. With each new question, with each note hidden in that notebook, her head was boiling with questions. Who was he really? Why did he suddenly seem so interested in her life? And most importantly, why did that man, who seemed to have given up on the world, now seem so attentive, so present, as if he were just waiting for the right moment to do something that would change everything? But the answer to all of this would still take a while to appear. And what would come next? She had no idea. As the days went by, something began to change in that small, stuffy room that always smelled of hospital alcohol. Little by little, almost without realizing it, the barrier between the two of them became less rigid. Before, she would just come in, do her job, and leave quickly, always taking with her the weight of the insults and the accumulated fatigue. But now, she started to stay a few extra minutes, not out of obligation, but because I felt that, somehow, he wanted to listen, he wanted to talk, even without admitting it. It was funny how the conversations started. First with simple questions, the kind we ask just to break the silence. She asked if he was in pain, if he wanted more water, if he wanted to change position in bed, and he, who had previously only responded with grunts, began to give complete answers. Then came his questions, a little shy, a little suspicious, as if testing whether she was really going to answer or just ignore him like everyone else did. "Do you have children?" She answered yes, that she had two. She told him a little about the struggle of putting food on the table, the fear of not having the basic things. She talked about the sleepless nights, the overdue bills, the times she thought about giving up, but didn't. And he listened. He paid attention in a way she didn't expect. He remained silent, looking at her as if it was the first time someone had told a real story in that room. One afternoon she told him how she used to save rice, mixing it with more water to make it last longer. And she also told him about the prayers she said every day before leaving home, asking for strength to endure another shift at the hospital. He listened to everything, quietly, but with that different look in his eyes, as if each word she said was stirring up some old memories stored inside him. At another point she talked about her children. She spoke of her youngest son, who liked to draw, even though he didn't have any colored pencils. She said she dreamed of one day being able to buy a new toy for both of them. And, as she spoke, she noticed that he surreptitiously turned his face to the side, as if he wanted to hide something. But she saw clearly, the corners of his eyes getting wet. He blinked quickly, as if he was struggling to hold back tears. But at that moment, she was sure, that man who everyone called useless, who was treated like trash, had feelings, and he was feeling everything. One day, she arrived early and found him awake, staring out the window with a lost look in his eyes. She walked over, pulled up a chair and sat next to the bed. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there. After a few minutes of silence, he said something she would never forget. "It's been a long time, since anyone treated me like a human." That fell like a stone on her chest. The lump in her throat was immediate. She swallowed hard, took his hand, something he never let her do, and said softly, "You are human, yes, and you deserve care, you deserve respect." He didn't answer. He just closed his eyes, but for the first time, not to pretend she wasn't there, but as if he was trying to keep that moment in his memory. And there, in that room where there was only pain, contempt, and loneliness, a real connection began to grow. A connection that none of the gossip in the hallways, no humiliation from the supervisor, and no judgmental looks could erase. It was just the two of them, two people broken by life, but who, somehow, were rebuilding themselves. Together. What she didn't know yet was that this connection was just the beginning, because something was coming, something that would change everything in a way she could never imagine. As the weeks went by, the connection between her and the old man became so obvious that it was no longer possible to hide it. The atmosphere in the hospital began to change, but not in a good way. What had previously been just a little joke in the corner of her mouth had now become an open mockery, spoken loudly for everyone to hear. She would barely walk down the hallway before she heard the nasty comments. The other caregivers, always in small groups, made a point of laughing out loud when she entered the break room. One afternoon, one of them blurted out in front of everyone, "Guys, look, there she goes again, the homeless nurse. It almost seems like she's in love with that dirty old man. It's almost pitiful." The words hit her chest like punches, but she took a deep breath, adjusted her blouse with trembling hands and moved on. She tried to pretend to be used to it, but inside her heart hurt. It really hurt, and how it hurt, because she knew she wasn't doing it out of self-interest, cheap pity, or any other selfish reason. She was doing it because it was the right thing to do, because she knew that no one else looked at him as a human being. But for those who saw it from the outside, it was easy to judge. One day, while she was changing his bandage, she heard two nurses whispering at the door. "She thinks she's going to get something out of this. She must be thinking that this old man is going to leave an inheritance. Don't dream. This is just another poor guy waiting to die." She heard every word. It was impossible not to hear. But as always, she swallowed her tears, smiled at him, and continued dressing him as if nothing had happened. The worst part was that the comments started to get worse and worse. They started to insinuate that she had problems, that she was unbalanced, that she was going crazy from working so much in that department. There was even a nursing technician who went so far as to say in a loud voice, for everyone to hear, "She treats that old man like he's a king. She just forgets that he's a king. He never was and never will be. At most, a well-groomed beggar." And the laughter, that malicious laughter, echoed through the hallways like the sound of a mocking audience. The hardest part for her was to endure all of this without exploding, because there were times when she felt like turning to each of them and shouting everything that had been stuck in her throat for weeks, telling them that it wasn't easy to leave home on an empty stomach, with children waiting, with rent late, and still having to put up with this kind of thing from people who, deep down, didn't have an ounce of compassion. But she didn't explode. She never exploded. She swallowed it all, like she always did. And even with all this pressure, even with everyone's judgmental gaze, she continued to go beyond the basics. She brought an old radio from home to play calming music in his room. She brought him tea she had made herself because she knew he liked ginger. She talked to him as if he were a member of the family. She told him about the children, the dreams she had, even the little joys, like when her oldest son got a good grade at school. He, on the other hand, just watched. He didn't say much, but she could see his eyes following her every move, as if he was memorizing every detail. Sometimes she would catch him with that smile on the corner of his mouth, discreet, almost imperceptible, but real, as if to say, "I see, I know." But what no one there at the hospital knew was that behind that silent and ragged old man, there was a story that none of those mocking people could imagine, a big secret, kept under lock and key, and that, when it came to light, would make each of those laughing mouths shut up in shame. But that moment hadn't arrived yet. That morning, everything seemed the same. She left the house in the same hurry as always, with her worn-out shoes on her feet and her head full of worries about what she was going to cook for the children's dinner later. The route to the hospital was the same as always, the same crowded buses, the same stop, the same weak coffee at the entrance to try to trick an empty stomach. But there was something in the air, a strange feeling, as if that day had been designed to go wrong. When she passed by the reception, some of the employees who were always gossiping stopped talking immediately. They lowered their heads and looked away, as if they were hiding something. She found it strange, but she kept walking. Her mind was only focused on one thing, the old man's room. She wanted to see if he had slept well, if he had eaten, if he hadn't had any crises during the night. But before she even reached the hallway, she was called to the supervision office. Her heart raced. It was rare for her to be called there, and when they did, it was never for anything good. She entered the room with her usual weak smile, trying to appear calm, but inside her stomach was already churning. The supervisor, with that cold look and the fake smile that she was already familiar with, got straight to the point. No beating around the bush, no messing around. "So-and-so, unfortunately, you are dismissed as of today." For a few seconds she stood there, not understanding, hearing the words echo as if in slow motion. "Dismissed? Just like that, out of nowhere? What do you mean?" She tried to breathe, but it seemed like no air would come in. With her voice trembling, she asked, "But what happened? Why? Did I do something wrong?" And then came the final blow. The supervisor, with that cynical tone, dropped the bomb. "We have received several complaints that you are being negligent with other patients, that you have been dedicating yourself to just one and neglecting the others. We cannot allow this type of behavior here." She was shocked. It was a lie. She knew it was a lie. She had always done her job with dedication, taking care of everyone, even when she was exhausted. She tried to argue, tried to explain, but the supervisor already had her speech ready. "The decision has been made. You can go to HR and sign your termination." And that was it. No chance to defend yourself, without even hearing her version. And as if that wasn't enough, when she left the room with tears in her eyes, She still had to listen to the giggles of the other caregivers in the hallway. One of them, without a hint of shame, whispered loud enough for her to hear, "Yeah, those who get too attached to useless old people end up like that. Serves them right." She left the place with her legs shaking. The world seemed to be spinning. Her heart was racing. The tears began to fall before she even reached the hospital gate. The only thing she could think about was, how was she going to tell her children about this? How was she going to pay the rent? How was she going to buy food? The despair mixed with the feeling of injustice was suffocating. But what she didn't know yet is that while she was leaving through the back door, humiliated, crying and thinking that everything was over, inside that hospital, there was someone paying attention to every detail of that scene. Someone who, very soon, would change her life in a way that no one, absolutely no one, would be able to predict. The next morning, the atmosphere inside the hospital was strange, different from any other day. It seemed like the air was heavier, as if everyone knew something big was about to happen, but no one knew exactly what. Nurses, doctors, technicians, even the security guards, everyone was urgently called to appear in the auditorium. And of course, the gossip had already spread through the hallways in less than 5 minutes. Emergency meeting? Are they going to cut staff? Did someone important die? Will there be an inspection? These were the comments that popped up from corner to corner. The supervisor, with her usual arrogant demeanor, entered the room already feeling like she was the one in charge of the situation, as if she herself had organized the whole thing. She crossed her arms, stood right in front, with that smile on her lips that only she could do when she thought she was in control. The other caregivers were there, too, laughing, whispering, still celebrating the protagonist's dismissal as if it had been a personal victory. The silence was only broken when, suddenly, the door in front opened abruptly. Everyone turned to look, and what they saw left the entire room breathless. The one who came in was him, the old man. That old man everyone had been calling for weeks a pauper, a burden, useless, dead weight. But this time, he wasn't wearing dirty clothes, nor did he have an unkempt beard. That tired look. He came in wearing a suit, an expensive, impeccable, finely cut suit, the kind you only see on grown-ups. Behind him, 2 private security guards, the kind with the unfriendly look on their faces, who walked in sync. The shock was immediate. People started looking at each other as if they were seeing a ghost. The whispers got louder. A doctor even dropped her pen on the floor. People were rubbing their eyes, thinking they were hallucinating. But no, it was real. He walked slowly to the stage of the meeting room, stopped right in the center, calmly adjusted the microphone, looked at everyone with an expression that mixed seriousness with a certain air of satisfaction, and then took a deep breath and spoke in a firm, clear and strong voice, completely different from the weak and discouraged tone he used in the hospital bed. "Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, I am the real owner of this hospital." Total silence. No one was breathing. The shock was so great that you could hear the creaking of chairs as people began to shift nervously in their seats. The old man, no, the African millionaire, continued, "For the past few months, I have been here, pretending to be just another patient, observing every behavior, every attitude, every look of contempt, every gesture of compassion." His gaze wandered around the room, and when it stopped on the supervisor, she turned pale. Her hands were shaking. She tried to hide it, but her nervousness was visible even to those in the back of the room. He gave a slight smile from the corner of his mouth, the kind that only those who have suffered a lot know how to do, and finished with a sentence that made everyone's heart race. "Today, everything is going to change here, and it's going to start now." What he was going to do from then on, and what was going to happen to each person there, well, you'll find out in the next part, because what comes next is even more shocking. The silence. that took over the room after that last sentence of his seemed endless. It was as if the air had been drained from the auditorium. No one dared to move, no one was breathing properly. The supervisor, who until a few minutes ago had been full of herself, with that air of someone who gave orders and orders, now had a pale face. Her hands were sweating cold, and her gaze was lost, as if she'd been struck by lightning in broad daylight. The African millionaire, now in front of everyone, paused, briefly, looked her straight in the eyes, and said in a firm voice, full of authority but without losing his calm, "Let's start with you." He didn't even need to say her name. Everyone knew who he was talking about. The supervisor tried to mumble something, started to take 2 steps forward as if to justify herself, but he raised his hand in a quick gesture, asking for silence, and he got straight to the point. "During the entire time I was here, I saw with my own eyes the way you treated people who were just trying to do their job. I saw the lack of respect, the arrogance, the unnecessary yelling, and, worst of all, the cruel way you humiliated the most compassionate people in this hospital. A person like that has no place here." The entire room held its breath. The hearts of those watching seemed to beat in their throats. The caregivers who laughed at her every day were now wide-eyed, looking at each other, not knowing what to do. The supervisor tried to argue, her voice cracking, but he was categorical. "Your dismissal is immediate. Please leave." The impact was so great that some people in the back of the room began to whisper quietly, "My God, is this serious?" She was really fired like that, in front of everyone. But it didn't stop there. After that came the moment that no one expected, and that many there deserved to go through. The millionaire took a list and began to call, one by one, the same employees who laughed, mocked, humiliated, and made the protagonist's life a daily hell. Each name called was followed by a look of pure terror. Some were demoted to less responsible positions, others were fired right there, without the right to discuss. He didn't leave room for lame excuses or for last-minute tears of regret. The message was clear. Whoever sowed evil was now reaping the results. And to end that moment of justice with a flourish, he looked at everyone who was still in the room and said with a calmness that seemed almost rehearsed, "From today on, only those who have a heart will work here, those who treat others with respect, those who see beyond appearances." The silence was replaced by a mixture of shock and relief. Some of the humbler employees, who had also been victims of injustice in that hospital, held back their smiles, trying to hide their joy at seeing that turnaround happening right there, right in front of everyone. But what no one knew yet was that the biggest surprise, the biggest twist, was yet to come. What he would do for the woman who treated him with dignity, while the entire world saw him as a burden. That would still leave everyone speechless. And when everyone thought the big turnaround had already happened, came the moment that no one inside would ever forget. The millionaire took a deep breath, looked towards the door, and signaled for someone to come in. And who came in was her, the caregiver. The same woman who had been thrown out, humiliated, and wronged the day before. She came in with red eyes, still unable to believe that she had been called back. She walked slowly, with that usual simple manner, looking at the ground as if she still didn't understand what was happening. When she looked up, she found him there, standing, well-dressed, firm. And now, in front of everyone, he made a point of saying out loud, with each word charged with emotion, "This woman taught me what humanity is. She taught me what true kindness is. When everyone else turned their backs on me, it was she, only she, who stayed." The entire auditorium fell into absolute silence. Some people were already starting to cry. There was a nurse who put her hand over her mouth agape. The mood inside was one of regret for some and emotion for others, but he continued without hesitation. "That's why, as of today, she is officially the new special care coordinator of this hospital, and her salary, will be 5 times what she was earning before. Because people with heart deserve to be recognized and very well paid. She brought her hands to her face. She couldn't hold back her tears. The tears fell without stopping, and this time they weren't tears of sadness nor of pain. They were tears of relief, of justice, of gratitude, and of a relief she didn't even know she would feel one day. As she cried, people began to applaud. First one, then another. And before she knew it, the entire room was clapping for her. And he wasn't done yet. He looked at her once more and said, with that smile of someone who had already planned everything, "And there's more, because I know that the new salary won't solve everything overnight. So, to start this new phase, I'm giving you a house, yours, fully paid off. It's not rent, it's not a loan, it's a gift." She almost fell to her knees right there. If it weren't for a nurse who grabbed her arm, she would have collapsed on the floor. Her children, who had been secretly called in for this moment, came running through the door, and the hug between the 3 of them was the kind of scene that would make any hard heart soften. And as the tears rolled, he finished with the phrase that summed it all up. A simple phrase, but one that carried the weight of every tear, every humiliation, every sleepless night she had faced. When no one sees, God sees. When no one values, heaven rewards. Her kindness changed my life, and now her life is changing too. The auditorium erupted in applause. Those who had laughed at her before were now crying with emotion and shame. Those who had humiliated her were lowering their heads. But she, for the first time, was crying with joy. She was crying for finally seeing life smiling back at her. And then you could feel it, right? This story touched you because deep down, in some way, it also speaks a little about each one of us. Who has never experienced a moment of injustice? Who has never had the feeling of being invisible, of doing good and no one seeing it? Just by staying this far, you can already know that your heart is like hers. You truly feel it. You get emotional. You believe that life can change at any moment. And that's why the like you left now and your subscription here on the channel are like a sign that stories like this continue to reach more people who also need a word of hope, a little push to believe again. It's that simple gesture, but it makes all the difference. And hey, I want to know, do you also believe that good things always come back? So comment here with a word that defines everything this story brought to you. Write it in the comments. Justice. I really want to see how many people here are celebrating this incredible turnaround. And speaking of turning points, do you want to know what happened to the supervisor after all this public humiliation? Do you want part 2 of this story? Then comment here, part 2, because look, what she's still going to go through is the stuff of soap operas. Now, before you go, just take a look at the video that's appearing on the screen. It's an even stronger story, with a twist that will give you goosebumps. Seriously, click there because you deserve to experience this emotion again.